I don't really know how to start this because honestly, I'm still trying to wrap my head around what happened. It wasn't just a bad dream. It wasn't my imagination playing tricks on me. Something happened in my apartment that night, and no matter how much I try to rationalize it, there's no logical explanation that makes sense. But let me back up a bit. My name's Rachel Carter, and I live alone in a small apartment in Chicago. It's nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom place in an older building that still has its original wood flooring and those big, drafty windows that rattle when the wind picks up. It's the kind of apartment you move into in your 20s when you're still figuring things out, balancing bills, and pretending that eating ramen 3 nights in a row is totally fine. It had been a long, exhausting day at work. I'm a bartender, so my shifts usually end late, and by the time I get home, my feet are aching, my clothes reek of whiskey and beer, and all I want is to collapse in bed. That night was no different. It was a Thursday, which meant the usual mix of office workers trying to drown their stress, college kids sneaking in with fake IDs, and lonely old men nursing their drinks like it was the only thing keeping them alive. By the time I locked up and got home, it was past 3 a.m. I remember tossing my purse onto the couch, kicking off my boots, and heading straight for the bathroom to wash off the stink of the bar. The apartment was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I didn't even bother turning on the lights. I knew my place well enough to navigate it blindfolded. That's when I felt it. You know that weird, inexplicable feeling when something just isn't right? Like when you walk into a room and instantly sense that someone's been there before you, even though you know you're alone. That kind of feeling. It stopped me dead in my tracks right there in the hallway. My skin prickled and suddenly my own apartment felt foreign, like I'd stepped into a slightly altered version of it, almost identical, but off in a way I couldn't pinpoint. I shook it off, blaming it on exhaustion, and went into my bedroom. I flicked on the lamp by my bed and finally let out a breath. Everything looked normal. My unmade bed, the pile of laundry I kept promising myself I'd fold, the paperback novel sitting face down on my nightstand. Nothing was out of place. Then I turned toward my mirror and froze. The full-length mirror that had been standing in the corner of my room for years, the one I used every morning to check my outfit, was shattered. Completely. Long, jagged cracks splintered across the surface, like a spiderweb of broken glass, but what made my blood run cold was the shape of those cracks. At first, my tired brain struggled to process it, but the longer I stared, the clearer it became. The cracks had formed the outline of a face that looked like it was screaming. I backed away so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. My heart was hammering in my chest. This didn't make any sense. That mirror had been fine when I left for work. I lived alone, there was no one else in my apartment who could have done this. And even if someone had broken in, why the hell would they shatter my mirror but leave everything else untouched? I took a shaky breath, forcing myself to think logically. Maybe it had fallen over and broken somehow? But no, the frame was still standing perfectly upright, pushed into the corner where it always was. I moved closer, hesitantly reaching out to touch one of the cracks. The moment my fingertips grazed the glass. Thud. A loud, heavy thud came from the living room. I jerked my hand back and spun toward the doorway, my pulse skyrocketing. That sound was inside my apartment. It wasn't the pipes, it wasn't the neighbors, it was here. And I wasn't alone. I stood frozen in place, my breath caught in my throat. My mind raced, trying to come up with any reasonable explanation for what I just heard. Maybe something fell? Maybe I left a window open and the wind knocked something over? But no, the windows were shut. I knew that for a fact. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the sound hadn't been random. It wasn't the clatter of a falling object. It was deliberate. Like a footstep. I felt my whole body go cold. I didn't have any weapons. Not unless you counted a can of dry shampoo or the cheap kitchen knife in my drawer that couldn't even cut through a tomato properly. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, gripping it so tightly my knuckles turned white. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I took a slow step toward my bedroom door, pressing my ear against it. The apartment was dead silent. Too silent. If someone was out there, they weren't moving anymore. That was somehow worse. I clenched my teeth and forced myself to breathe. I had 2 options. Either I stayed in my room and waited for something to happen, or I ripped the band-aid off and checked the damn apartment. The second option sounded insane, but I couldn't just stand there all night paralyzed. I slowly turned the knob and inched the door open. The hallway was dim, the only light spilling in from the street lamp outside my window. Everything looked exactly how I left it. But my gut told me something was wrong. I stepped out, moving cautiously toward the living room. The hardwood floor creaked under my weight, and I winced at how loud it sounded in the silence. I gripped my phone tighter, ready to call 911 at the slightest sign of movement. Then I saw it. My coffee table had moved. Not just a little, like someone had bumped into it. No, it had been dragged. The entire table, which normally sat in front of my couch, was now at an angle, shifted nearly a foot from its original spot. I stared at it. I had been in a rush when I got home, yeah, but not so much that I would have shoved my furniture around without noticing. And even if I had, why did the thud happen after I was already in my room? I swallowed hard, scanning the rest of the living room. The couch was normal. The kitchen beyond it was empty. The door was still locked, no signs of a break-in. But then my eyes landed on the floor. There were footprints. Faint but there. Like someone had walked through a thin layer of dust that I hadn't even realized had settled on the hardwood. They led from my coffee table, toward my bedroom. Toward me. I nearly dropped my phone. My stomach twisted so violently I thought I was going to be sick. I wasn't alone in my apartment. I spun around, my instincts screaming at me to run, but bang! A door slammed shut. Not the front door. Not the bathroom. My bedroom door. I whipped back around, my body locking up completely. The door I had just left open was now shut. My blood ran cold. There was no breeze, no draft, nothing that could have made it close by itself. And then, from inside my room, a faint, soft noise. A scraping sound. Like nails dragging against wood. I was done. Screw trying to figure it out, Screw being brave, I turned and bolted for the front door. I fumbled with the lock, yanking it open so fast it slammed against the wall. The second I was in the hallway, I ran. Barefoot, half-dressed, I didn't care. I ran down the hallway past my neighbor's doors straight for the stairwell. I didn't stop running until I was outside, standing in the freezing night air, gasping for breath. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and dialed my best friend's number. She picked up on the second ring. Rachel? It's almost 4 in the morning, what's... I need you to come get me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Right now. There was a pause. Then sharper, what's wrong? I turned back toward my apartment building, staring up at the darkened windows of my unit. I think someone's in my apartment. I stood outside my building, barefoot on the freezing concrete, my breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. The Chicago night air bit into my skin, but I barely felt it. My entire body was humming with panic, my muscles locked so tight they hurt. Rachel, Megan's voice came through the phone, urgent. Are you outside? Are you safe? Yeah, I ran out. I turned to look at the front entrance of my building, half expecting to see someone standing there. But the door remained closed. The hallway inside was dark. What the hell happened? I swallowed, my throat dry. I heard something. In my apartment. And... Meg, my mirror. I stopped myself. Saying it out loud made it sound insane. Like I was some paranoid freak jumping at shadows. But I knew what I saw. And I knew I wasn't alone in that apartment. I'm coming, Megan said immediately. Stay there. I'm getting in my car now. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Please hurry. I hung up and wrapped my arms around myself, glancing up at my window again. My bedroom light was still on, but everything else was dark. I couldn't see movement. No sign of anyone. But my gut was screaming at me that I had made the right choice by leaving. The next 10 minutes were the longest of my life. Every sound made me jump. A car door slamming down the street. The distant wail of a siren. A rustling in the bushes near the building entrance. I kept glancing at the windows of my apartment, half expecting to see a shadow move behind the glass. When Megan's car finally pulled up, I nearly collapsed from relief. She barely put it in park before throwing the door open and running toward me. Jesus, Ratch, you look terrible. I probably did. I was still in my work clothes, a black tank top and jeans, no jacket, no shoes. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold onto my phone. Come on, she said, grabbing my arm. Get in the car. I didn't need to be told twice. The moment I was inside, I locked the doors, rubbing my hands over my face, trying to calm down. Megan turned in her seat to face me. She was still in her pajama pants and hoodie, her dark brown hair pulled into a messy bun. All right. Tell me everything. I exhaled shakily. It started with the mirror. I told her everything. The shattered glass. The screaming face in the cracks. The heavy thud from the living room. The footprints leading toward my bedroom. And then, the door slammed shut behind me, Megan, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. And I heard something in my room. scraping, like nails against wood. Her expression hardened. Rachel, you need to call the cops. I hesitated. What if it was nothing? She stared at me. Nothing? Are you serious? You just ran barefoot into the street because you were so scared. And now you think maybe it was nothing? I opened my mouth to argue, but she was right. My heart was still pounding, and every time I thought about that damn mirror, my stomach twisted itself into knots. Megan pulled out her phone. I'm calling. I didn't stop her. 10 minutes later, a squad car pulled up. 2 officers stepped out, a tall, heavy-set guy named Officer Green and a younger, sharper-looking woman named Officer Patel. Megan and I got out of the car as they approached. You're the one who called? Green asked, looking at me. I nodded. Yeah, I live on the 3rd floor. Apartment 3B. Patel glanced up at the building. Tell us what happened. I ran through it all again. The noise, the door, the footprints, the mirror. Green and Patel exchanged a look. All right, Patel said. We'll go check it out. Do you have a key? I hesitated. The thought of going back up there made my stomach churn. I dug my keys out of my pocket and handed them over. Stay here, Patel said. Megan and I watched as they disappeared into the building. A heavy silence settled over us. Minutes passed. 5, 10, 15. Megan shifted nervously. Why is it taking so long? I didn't answer. I was staring at the front door of my building, my nails digging into my palm. Then finally the officers emerged. And something was wrong. Green looked off. His normally stern face was pale, his jaw tight. Patel was right beside him, her expression unreadable. They walked straight toward us. Did you find anything? I asked. My voice sounded small. Patel looked at me. There's no one in your apartment, she said. I exhaled shakily, relief flooding through me. But, she continued, and I swear to God my stomach dropped into my feet. The mirror you described? It's not broken. I stared at her. What? Green nodded. We checked everything. No signs of forced entry. Nothing disturbed. Your coffee table is in place. The floor is clean. And your mirror? It's completely fine. No, I whispered. My mouth had gone dry. No, that's not possible. I saw it. It was shattered. I touched the cracks. Patel held up a hand. Miss Carter, we've searched every inch of your apartment. There is no sign that anything happened here tonight. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My heart was hammering in my chest again, but this time for a different reason. Had I imagined it? Had I hallucinated the whole thing? No. The footprints. The scraping noise. The way the door slammed shut behind me. I didn't imagine that. I couldn't have. Megan must have seen the panic on my face because she stepped in. Okay, but maybe we can go check? Just to be sure. Patel sighed. We've already been through it. But if you'd feel better, we can walk you up. I hesitated. The thought of stepping back into that apartment made my skin crawl. But at the same time, I had to see it with my own eyes. Okay. Megan squeezed my hand as we followed the officers inside. The stairwell felt impossibly quiet. Each step echoed loudly, bouncing off the old walls. When we reached my floor, Patel led the way, unlocking my door and stepping aside so I could enter first. I stepped inside, and my stomach twisted into knots. Everything was exactly where it should be. The coffee table was in its usual spot. The footprints on the floor were gone. And the mirror. It stood in the corner completely intact. No cracks. No screaming face. Just my own reflection staring back at me. But the worst part, I could still feel it. That thick, heavy presence in the air. Like someone was watching. Like something was still there. I stood frozen in my apartment doorway, staring at the mirror that, just half an hour ago, had been shattered. Except now it wasn't. Now it was pristine. Flawless. And yet, something felt wrong. The air in the apartment was thick, off, like the oxygen had been replaced with something heavier. I could feel it pressing against my skin, settling in my lungs. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't crazy. Megan must have felt it too because she shifted uncomfortably beside me. Rach, she whispered. Patel cleared her throat. See? Everything's fine. No damage, no intruder. She gave me a look, one I recognized instantly. I'd seen it before whenever someone tried to politely tell me I was being irrational. Green crossed his arms. You've had a long night. Maybe you saw what you expected to see. The mind plays tricks when you're exhausted. I clenched my jaw. No, my voice was barely above a whisper. I know what I saw. The officers didn't argue, but I could tell they weren't taking me seriously. Do you want us to do one last sweep? Patel asked. I hesitated. My gut told me to say yes, to have them rip this place apart, to make sure there wasn't some sick bastard hiding in the walls, waiting for me to be alone. But at the same time, I knew that wouldn't help. Because whatever had been in my apartment wasn't just a person. And they wouldn't find it. No, I said finally. It's fine. Patel nodded, clearly relieved. If anything else happens, don't hesitate to call. And with that they left. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving Megan and me alone in the silence. For a long time, neither of us moved. Then quietly she asked, do you want to stay at my place tonight? I didn't answer right away. My instincts were screaming at me to say yes, to get the hell out of this apartment and never come back. But there was a small, nagging voice in the back of my head whispering, if you leave now, you'll never want to come back. And then what? Just abandon your apartment? No. I wouldn't let fear control me. I turned to Megan and forced a small, shaky smile. I'll be okay. She looked skeptical but didn't push it. Call me if anything happens. I'll be here in 5 minutes. I nodded. And then for the second time that night, I was alone. The apartment felt wrong in the silence. Every shadow seemed darker, every sound amplified. The hum of the refrigerator was suddenly ominous. The creak of the floorboards as I moved sent chills up my spine. I kept glancing at the mirror. It sat in its usual spot, reflecting the soft glow of my bedside lamp. My reflection stared back at me, pale and exhausted. I needed to sleep. I changed into pajamas, trying to act normal, like I wasn't on the verge of a full-blown panic attack. I hesitated before turning off the light, but I forced myself to do it. I climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. My heart was still racing, but eventually my body won over my brain and exhaustion dragged me under. And then, somewhere between awake and asleep, I heard it. A faint, barely there sound. A soft tap. 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 Like fingernails against glass. My eyes snapped open. My heart slammed against my ribs. I held my breath, straining to listen. Silence. Maybe I imagined it. I turned over, forcing my body to relax, closing my eyes again. Tap. 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 My stomach turned to ice. It was coming from across the room. From the corner. From the mirror. I wanted to move, but I couldn't. Every muscle in my body was locked in place, paralyzed by an overwhelming, suffocating dread. Tap. 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 I couldn't breathe. I knew I had to look. I turned my head ever so slowly. And then, I saw it. My reflection was wrong. It was me, but it wasn't me. It stood there in the mirror staring directly at me. But the longer I looked, the more I realized it wasn't mirroring me. I was lying in bed, facing the mirror. But in the reflection, she was standing. Her head tilted slowly to the side, her lips stretching into a smile. And then, without moving her mouth, I heard her voice. A whisper. A rasp. Let me out. The scream that tore from my throat didn't even sound human. I shot up in bed, fumbling for the lamp. My hands were shaking so violently I nearly knocked it over, but finally the room flooded with light. The mirror was normal. Just my reflection staring back. But my door. My bedroom door, it was open. And I knew without a doubt. I had locked it before I went to bed. My bedroom door stood open. A yawning black void leading into the hallway. I stared at it, my entire body rigid, my fingers clenched so tightly around my blanket that my knuckles ached. I knew I had locked that door. Hadn't I? A small, treacherous voice in my mind whispered, maybe you forgot. Maybe you were so exhausted you didn't check it properly. No, because I remembered turning the lock. I remembered the click. I remembered the sense of relief that came with it. And now it was open. I forced myself to move, my limbs trembling as I slid out of bed. My bare feet hit the cold wooden floor and the temperature sent a shiver up my spine. I took a slow step forward. Then another. The hallway was pitch black. The living room beyond it darker still. I reached the doorway, hesitating before stepping out. My breath felt loud in the silence. The apartment was still. Too still. I crept forward, my pulse hammering in my throat. The air felt heavier out here, thick with something unseen, something wrong. I reached for the hallway light switch and flicked it on. Nothing happened. My stomach dropped. The light had worked earlier. I knew it had. I flicked the switch again. And again. Still nothing. The entire apartment was swallowed in unnatural darkness, a suffocating kind of black that pressed in around me. And then, from somewhere in the living room, a soft, slow inhale. My throat clenched shut. It was the kind of sound a person makes when they're trying not to be heard. Long controlled, but unmistakably human. I went still. No. No, 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 no. My lungs burned as I held my breath, my ears straining for any other noise. The sound hadn't come from inside my head. It hadn't been a trick of my imagination. It was real. And it was close. I forced my feet to move, stepping backward, slow, careful, deliberate. The floorboards groaned beneath me. And then, from the darkness, a second inhale. Closer this time. Right by the couch. My stomach lurched. There is someone in my apartment. I turned and bolted. Not toward my bedroom. Not toward safety. Toward the front door. My hands fumbled desperately with the locks, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. I turned the deadbolt. Yanked the handle. The door didn't budge. No. No, please no. I twisted the knob, pulled harder. My muscles screamed with effort. It was jammed. Behind me, something moved. A shift of weight. A whisper of fabric. A presence looming closer. My vision swam. My pulse was a violent drumbeat in my ears. I couldn't look. I couldn't. Because if I turned around, if I saw, something brushed against the back of my neck. Fingertips. Cold. Featherlight. I choked on a sob, slamming my fists against the door. Please. I gasped. Let me out. And then, a sound. A horrible, inhuman sound. A laugh. But not like a normal laugh. It was distorted, like it was playing through a broken speaker, warping and cracking, stretching unnaturally. And worst of all, it sounded like me. The door suddenly ripped open and I fell forward onto the hallway floor. The light from the emergency exit sign bathed everything in a dim red glow. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding, and spun around. The door was shut, like it had never been open at all. I staggered backward, chest heaving, tears spilling down my face. I was done. I wasn't staying here another second. I turned and ran. Megan opened her door before I even knocked. She took one look at me barefoot, shaking, tears streaking my face, and pulled me inside without a word. What happened? She demanded, voice sharp with panic. I couldn't answer. I couldn't speak. My throat felt raw, like I'd been screaming for hours. She grabbed my shoulders. Rachel, talk to me. I tried. But my body was still locked in fight or flight mode, and all I could do was shake my head violently. Megan exhaled sharply. Okay. Sit. Breathe. I collapsed onto her couch, burying my face in my hands. My skin was clammy, ice cold despite the warmth of her apartment. Megan disappeared into the kitchen and came back with a glass of water. I took it with shaking hands, drinking in small, desperate sips. She sat beside me, silent for a moment. Then, I believe you. I blinked at her. She met my eyes, serious. I don't know what is happening, but I know you. And I know you're not crazy. Something inside me cracked. My breath hitched, and I felt fresh tears spill over. Megan grabbed my hand and squeezed. You're not going back there, she said firmly. I nodded. Because I already knew. I was never setting foot in that apartment again. But even as I sat there, surrounded by the warmth of my best friend's living room, something in my gut told me it wasn't over. Because when I ran out of my apartment, when the door ripped open, for a split second just before I crossed the threshold, I saw something. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. Just a glimpse. A shape. A figure. Standing in front of the mirror. Watching me leave. And the worst part? It wasn't my reflection anymore. It was someone else entirely. I didn't sleep. I sat on Megan's couch, wrapped in a blanket, knees tucked to my chest, my eyes locked on the living room window as if at any second, I'd see something watching from the darkness outside. Megan dozed off eventually, curled up in the armchair, but I couldn't let myself close my eyes. Every time I did, I heard it again. That laugh. That warped, broken version of my own voice. I gripped my phone so tightly my fingers ached. thumb hovering over the dial pad, debating whether to call the cops again. But what would I even tell them? That something wasn't right in my apartment? That I heard things? That I felt something standing behind me in the dark? They wouldn't believe me. They'd just say I was exhausted. That I imagined it. I swallowed hard, forcing my gaze away from the window. The room was dim, only the soft yellow glow of the kitchen night light keeping the darkness at bay. I listened to the sound of Megan's steady breathing. And then, something creaked. My blood ran cold. It wasn't Megan. It wasn't me. It came from the hallway, right outside her apartment door. My heart slammed against my ribs. I went completely still, every muscle in my body locking up. Then, another sound. A slow, dragging scrape against the floor. My breath hitched. I turned my head as silently as I could, eyes locked on the gap beneath the front door. For a few agonizing seconds, there was nothing. Just silence. And then, a shadow moved. Right outside. I clamped a hand over my mouth, my entire body trembling. My heartbeat was a deafening roar in my ears. Another shadow. A slow, deliberate shift of something standing there. Not moving. Not knocking. Just waiting. I reached out and shook Megan's shoulder, my pulse hammering. She groaned, blinking blearily. What? I pressed a finger to my lips. Shoo. She frowned, confused, then stiffened as she heard it too. Another slow, dragging scrape. We locked eyes. Megan's breath came shallow and fast, her pupils blown wide with fear. She reached for her phone on the coffee table, moving in agonizing slow motion. And then, tap, tap, tap. 3 sharp, precise knocks. I nearly screamed. Megan shot me a panicked look. Neither of us moved. Neither of us breathed. Then, the doorknob turned. I choked on a gasp, my entire body breaking into an icy sweat. The knob rattled once. Twice. Like whoever was outside was testing it. Checking if it was locked. Megan grabbed my hand in a vice grip. For several agonizing seconds, nothing happened. And then, the knob snapped back into place. Footsteps. Slow dragging. Moving away. We waited. 5 seconds. 10. 30. Neither of us dared to move. Finally, Megan reached for her phone with shaking hands, unlocking it and typing frantically. She held up the screen so I could see. Calling the cops. Don't make a sound. I nodded, barely breathing. She hit dial. Put it on speaker. 911, what's your emergency? Megan's voice trembled. There was someone outside my apartment. They tried to open the door. The dispatcher's voice remained calm. Can you describe them? No, Megan whispered. We didn't see them. But they knocked and then they tried the doorknob. A pause. Is your door locked? Yes. Do you have any windows or secondary exits? Just the fire escape, but it's locked too. We're sending officers to your location now. Stay inside. Don't engage. Keep all entry points secure. Megan nodded, even though the dispatcher couldn't see. We sat there, shaking, waiting for what felt like an eternity. Then, a knock. We both jumped. Then, a voice. Police. Megan scrambled to the peephole, her breath still shaky. After a moment, she let out a shuddering sigh of relief and unlocked the door. 2 officers stood there, one of them holding a flashlight, the other a notepad. Megan let them in, still visibly shaken. We checked the hall, one of them said. Didn't see anyone. No signs of forced entry anywhere in the building. I swallowed hard. But we heard them. The officer nodded, jotting something down. We'll check the security footage, see if we catch anything. In the meantime, it's probably best if you don't stay alone tonight. Megan shot me a look and I nodded stiffly. I wasn't going anywhere alone. The officers took our statements, then left. Megan locked every possible entrance, double-checked every window, then turned to me. You're staying here. I nodded numbly. Neither of us slept. But in the silence of Megan's apartment, as I sat curled up on the couch, something gnawed at the edges of my mind. Something was wrong. Something didn't make sense. Because when I ran from my apartment, when I heard that laugh, the door had been locked. And when I looked back, it had been closed. Which meant, whatever was in my apartment, whatever had been in there with me, had never left. And now someone or something had followed me here. I don't remember falling asleep. One moment, I was sitting upright on Megan's couch, wrapped in a blanket, still shaking from the night before. The next, my head snapped up, my heart hammering. Something had woken me up. I didn't know what. The apartment was dark, the only light a faint red glow from the clock on the microwave. Megan was still in the armchair, curled up, her back to me. But something felt wrong. The air was heavy, the silence too deep. And then, a noise. A tiny, almost imperceptible creak, like weight shifting on a floorboard. I froze. The sound had come from the hallway, right outside Megan's bedroom door. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. My hands clenched into fists beneath the blanket. Megan heard it too. I knew because her breathing had changed. She was awake, completely still, listening. The seconds stretched. My skin prickled with fear. Then, a slow, careful inhale. Not mine. Not Megan's. Someone else was in the apartment. I saw Megan shift slightly. She had her phone in her hands, typing something. A second later, my own phone vibrated. I glanced at the screen. It followed you. My stomach twisted violently. I typed back, "Call 911. Megan's breathing hitched. She turned her screen toward me. Her last message. I did. No service. My lungs locked up. The apartment had service. I had checked earlier. But now, I glanced at the Wi-Fi symbol. No connection. No bars. Nothing. I felt sick. My mind was racing. We weren't just trapped. We were cut off. Megan shifted slightly, angling her phone toward the hallway. The screen cast a dim glow, barely reaching the doorway. And then for a split second, something moved. A shadow. Tall. Motionless. Standing just beyond the light. I clamped a hand over my mouth. Megan's body went rigid. Neither of us moved. Neither did it. Then, tap. A single step forward. A breath away from the light. But it stopped. It was watching us. Waiting. My skin crawled. My body screamed at me to run, to fight, to do something. Then Megan did the bravest or stupidest thing I'd ever seen. She grabbed a flashlight from the side table, flicked it on, pointed it straight at the hallway. And there was nothing. Empty. But the second that light hit the floor, footsteps. Fast. Rushing toward us. I screamed. Megan threw the flashlight. It hit something solid, but we saw nothing. Just the impact. Just the way it bounced off something unseen and hit the floor with a clatter. We bolted. Ran for the door, hands fumbling at locks. The handle turned. From the outside. My entire body seized with terror. The door ripped open. Blinding white light flooded the room. A voice shouted, "Police! Hands up!" Megan screamed. I staggered backward, blinking against the sudden brightness. And just like that, it was over. 2 cops stormed in, guns drawn. One grabbed me, the other Megan, both shouting questions, but we were too stunned to answer. One of them checked the apartment. Nothing. No signs of forced entry. No one else inside. Just us. And yet, they had seen someone. Because they told us, when they arrived, they saw a man standing in Megan's window, watching us. But when they burst in, gone. Like he had never been there at all. The aftermath. I didn't go back to my apartment. Not ever. I had my brother pack up my things while I stayed with Megan. I told my landlord I was breaking the lease. I did not care. The police never found anything. No forced entry. No fingerprints. Nothing on security cameras. But something had been there. Something had been watching. And it wasn't just in my head. Because 2 nights after I left, my upstairs neighbor, an older woman I barely knew, was found dead in her apartment. Her front door locked. Her bedroom mirror shattered. The cracks forming a face. A screaming face. And the worst part? She lived directly above me. That's it. That's the end. I don't have answers. I don't know what was really in that apartment, or why it followed me. But I do know one thing. Whatever it was, it's still there. Watching. Waiting. And some other poor soul is going to move in, see the cracks in the mirror. And it'll start all over again.